Now the slice plane tool is fairly helpful for basically making a cut down the center or the selection area that you have for your object. Now the slice plane is a two-part operation. If we turn on the function for slice plane, you'll notice that we now have this yellow square around our mesh, and if we sort of rotate it or move it up and down, you'll see that what it's doing is it's creating a series of vertices and sort of like a cut along the surface of our object. And so we can move it kind of into place, and once it's at a location that we're happy with, we can then click on the slice tool, and then once you're done, you can either left click on slice plane again or make additional cuts if you need to. But now we've gone ahead and cut this additional series of vertices into the object. And so we'll click on slice plane, and let's say we want to make another cut along this way. We'll move it over here, and then when we're happy with that, press the slice tool, and then exit out of slice plane, and there you go. Now the quick slice tool is a little bit nasty. I don't like to use this very much. It's a very kind of dangerous operation. It basically works like a really hardcore version of the slice plane that will just, wherever you left click on the object, it sort of throws this interactive line across the surface of your geometry, and then when you're happy with it, you just release the left mouse button to move it, and then left click again. Now the reason why is this could cause all sorts of issues with excess geometry, and it's not exactly as clean or precise as slice plane. I won't use it much personally, however that's how the tool works. Now if we go back over here to our cylinder, the cut tool works very similar to a slice plane, or if you can imagine a pair of scissors. You're going to see the icon actually change here in the middle of your screen. And what it is it's sort of like a crosshair that will change depending on where you are on the object. And so, for example, if we go to an edge, you'll see that it's a little bit more precise, and that icon just switches to let you know that you're along an edge. And if it's along a vertice, you'll notice that the crosshair gets really, really small. That's just to let you know that you've actually are connected to an individual vertice. Now this is a little bit better for kind of manually going in and clicking and cutting an individual shape. However, you do want to be careful that you don't accidentally click too prematurely, because just when you think that you've got a cut at an actual vert, you may actually, if you zoom way in, you may see that you missed it just slightly. Cut tool can be kind of renowned for people thinking that they've got to cut, and then cut, but then when they zoom in, they realize that the vert wasn't actually welded together. So you want to be cautious of that if you're wanting to maintain a solidified mesh, is that you watch that icon and really watch for it to snap to that really, really small pair of crosshairs, and this will allow you to make cuts along the surface of your object. And now to exit out of cut tool, just right click and then right click again. And now you're not cutting anymore, or you can always just go back and left click on the cut tool. Now underneath of that, M-Smooth and Tessellate, we won't be using this very much, specifically outside of the Edit Geometry tab over here. This is probably not a tool that you'll be using here. There are other methods for smoothing your object and tessellation, which are a little easier to control, so we won't worry about those guys. Now the Make Planar tool is basically, these are your alignment tools here. If you can kind of imagine a small square around here, this is how you can quickly align and adjust selections that you have. Now if I'm going to go ahead and grab this front-facing selection of vertices, just sort of a random selection, what the Make Planar tool is going to try to do is more or less kind of adjust all of the vertices sort of averaged out, so that if we looked at it from the side, you'll see that it kind of flattened them all out in such a way that they're all lined up along the same sort of averaged out axes. And so if we grab a couple more here and hit the Make Planar tool, that sort of flattens all those guys out. Now this is a pretty nasty mesh here, so let's exit out of that, and let's go over here and I'll show you a little bit better example here with this box. Let me pull out a few of these verts just kind of randomly, and we'll exit out of the realistic shaded mode. And then from here, so let's say you have sort of this just really bizarre twisted version of your mesh, and you want to get in there and you want to clean those verts up so that they're flattened out better. You can select all of them, and then just hit the Make Planar tool, and that's basically going to average all of the verts out so that you have a nice clean flat surface to work on, rather than the verts being sort of in wild unusual positions. This evens them out correctly. Now for the X, Y, and the Z, let's go ahead and unhide all, and let's start with a new cylinder. Drag them up, convert to editable poly. And now what I'm going to do is switch to vertex mode, and I'm going to sort of intentionally drag these guys a little bit off so that they aren't even anymore. Just by drag selecting. And then maybe even grab a selection of these and kind of pull them off. And just kind of randomizing it a little bit. Now what the common circumstance is for you to want to use the X, Y, and the Z align tools is basically, let's say that we go into our front view and we realize, you know, I want to make this even so that it's correctly, or I want to correct it so that the line is straight, rather than making another slice plane or reconnecting it with a completely different rebuild of the geometry. You can also use the X, Y, and the Z align tools. And so if we quickly just click on the Z and make it line up correctly. And so for example, with this selection of vertices here, if we select the X axes, that will actually straighten them out as well. Now I've been doing 3D for quite a while, and sometimes I get confused whether it's X or Y or Z, depending on the object and where I am in 3D space. Sometimes this kind of can change on you. But just get comfortable with holding down or rather clicking the X, Y, and the Z, and then pressing Control Z to undo if you messed up and got the wrong direction that you want. But that's basically it. It'll straighten out any selection of these vertices so that they're correct. And so, for example, if we wanted to do it again from the top view, we could go into our top view in wireframe, select a bunch of these, do X and Y, and that'll line them all back up. So there we go. Let's go ahead and pull this back, and that'll straighten it back out. Now, obviously, to get it perfect, we probably would need to start back over with our cylinder, or we would have to kind of go in and manually grab verts and kind of move them the shape that we want. But in order to get a perfect cylinder, there's really not a lot we can do now at this point. But for testing purposes, you get the idea. Now, underneath of that, the view align is not really something that I'm going to use very much of either. However, the purpose of it is, let's say that we have this selection of vertices and we zoom in on it. What we will do is if we click the view align, that will align all of the vertices exactly to the angle at which the viewport is currently facing. It's a little bit unusual, and there's probably not a lot of times where I'd want to use it. Like, let's say I had the camera pointed here, I could click view align, and it'll totally distort my mesh, but what it's doing is it's basically telling all those verts to aim and point directly at me wherever the camera is at the time. Now, maybe it would be helpful if I was on a front view and I wanted to hit view align. That would flatten that selection out. However, this isn't exactly the most commonly used tools in my toolbox. Now, underneath of that grid align, we won't get into that too much until we start talking about grids and snaps. But beneath that, the relax tool, let's create a new plane. We'll throw it down. And this number of segments is probably fine. So let's convert this to an editable poly. We'll go to vertex mode. And now let's look at the relax tool. So basically what it does is if I grab a selection of verts and kind of move them around a bit, just to kind of intentionally mess it up just slightly, maybe grab a handful of them and pull them up slightly. What the relax tool is going to do is if I, once again, select a series of vertices that is slightly, a little bit sloppy here, if I just click it once, what it tries to do is sort of average out the distances and the space between the vertices to sort of improve our topology a little bit cleaner. And so, for example, if we had a large selection of vertices along the top, let's shrink them down just a bit more to get some sort of like a hilly, mountainous looking scene here. Let's pull these verts up even more. What this will do is we grab them and then we can relax it by clicking relax, relax, relax. And that just sort of helps to more evenly distribute the vertices so that the distances are closer to one another correctly. Now you will notice that it sort of distorts the size and scale of our original mountaintop, but if we just had like a small selection of verts that was a little bit messed up and we wanted to make sure that we could even those guys out a little bit better in order to get a little bit cleaner geometry, we could just double click a few times on relax, and that'll even the guys out quite a bit better. Now, hide selected, unhide all, and hide unselected is pretty self-explanatory. If we grab a selection of vertices and we want to hide them, they're not gone or deleted. We just simply can't select them or edit them anymore. And if we unhide all, they'll all come back. And then hide unselected is helpful for, let's say I want to just focus on this top part of this mesh, and I don't want to accidentally select any additional vertices. I can click hide unselected, and now I will only be able to work here on the vertices that are showing. I can't adjust or select any of the other ones until I go in and hit hide unselected. And if you have none of them selected, you'll notice that since there's nothing selected, everything disappears, so we can just hit unhide all. Now under that, under name selections, we won't really be using this, and full interactivity is not really anything to worry about right now either. Now soft selection is a little bit interesting. This is something that I'll use occasionally if I want to kind of get a little bit of an organic or softer kind of a pull on a selection of verts. And so for example, let me go ahead and turn on editable poly. And if I grab, let's say, just a small corner of these verts here, let's go ahead and minimize these other tabs for now. And let's just look at soft selection. The first thing we want to do is actually turn on use soft selection. And as soon as we do, you'll notice that our vertice colors start to change from red to green to yellow. And then as it sort of tapers out, you'll notice that there really doesn't seem to be any color change out here. And what that means is that as we adjust these vertices, there's a small amount of fall off that takes place based on the distance that we select over here. And so for example, let's grab just one vertice, and our fall off range, if we crank this up quite a bit, you'll notice that our vertices start to slowly kind of gradually turn into this softer shade of blue. And if we pull on the vertices now, we get sort of a curvature to the pull that we, or the manipulation that we make on this vert, similar to what we see kind of here in this curve. And you can adjust this by playing with the pinch, which is a really kind of more sharp curve. And so for example, if we pull it up there, we're going to get a much sharper, crisper angle on it. And if we undo that and we move the pinch down so it's kind of a little bit somewhere in the even, a little bit of an average range, you know, you can kind of flare it out a bit more as well. And it's just something that you can kind of play around with. The idea being that here at the topmost point gets the majority of the movement, and then everything else kind of follows this nice sweeping motion that you have here. This is also really helpful for, let's say I wanted to pull up a selection of vertices, you know, to kind of get that same sort of mountaintop area that we talked about before. Using soft selection is much quicker and a little bit more accurate for, you know, a little bit more of a softer, organic sort of surface. And so we can pull this down. Maybe we get another pull. It's a little bit tighter. And that's going to have a little bit better topology and a little bit more uniform and be soft without the need for using the relax tool. Now just underneath of that we have paint deformation. And if I go ahead and minimize soft selection, let's go down to paint deformation, and let's take a look at that by creating yet another plane. These are some of the more commonly used tools for, you know, somewhat organic, softer shapes as opposed to some of the hard surface type stuff that we'll look at on a lot of our other shapes. So if we convert this to editable poly, what I want to do is under paint deformation is if I have just a series of vertices along a flat plane like this, if I click on the push-pull value, you'll notice that there's sort of this blue spinner that pops up. And we can increase the size of it by adjusting the brush size. And so for example, if you're looking at yours and it's really small and you can barely see it, over here we're going to adjust the brush size, turn it up to about 25 or 30. And now we've got a really large brush to work with. Now how push-pull actually works is all we need to do is hold down the left mouse button and we can sort of manually sculpt out small details along the surface of this topology. Now if we hold down the Alt key, this will push it downward rather than up. And then if I hold down the Control key, what this attempts to do is basically revert it back to its original state. And so I can hold down Control and just kind of flatten it all out so that it goes back to where it was before we started painting. And so hold down left mouse button, click, this will drag it up. And once you have a value that you're happy with, what you want to do is you want to commit over here underneath of brush options. You're going to click commit, and that basically says, okay, cool, I'm done painting, I'm happy with this topology, and this is what I'm going to go with. Now the relax tool under paint deformation, this is really helpful, very similar to the relax function, only you can use it with a brush, which makes it a little bit easier to kind of manually go in and relax out a series of vertices. And so what we want to do is left click on that. And as we sort of paint along the surface, this is kind of helping us to average out our vertices a little bit more accurately, and without the need to go in and manually select a whole bunch of verts. We can just kind of do it really quick with the paint deformation tool using the relax. This is especially helpful if you have like a character or a really soft organic piece of geometry and you want to kind of get it back to a good soft spot. So for example, let's say you were working on a boat and you had like the ship's hull. That's a common tool for it. You want to get the boat to kind of have a nice curvature to the bottoms of it, or maybe like a sort of a mountainous hill, kind of like what I have going on here. That would be a good way to sort of relax it all out so that the topology is nice and clean. Now revert will simply pull it back from where it was before you just got done painting until previously when you've actually committed. And so for example, just now I was relaxing to relax this shape out, and now I'm painting to revert it back to the kind of messed up version that I had before. And so you want to be cautious not to get too far ahead of yourself, and then at some point you want to go ahead and click commit once you've made those adjustments. So for now, let's go ahead and delete all these shapes, and let's start with another box. Let's bring the grid back up. And now let's move on to our next subobject mode, which is edge mode.